Michael, firstly, for those who don't know, what is the Clean Energy Finance Corporation?
Yeah, so the CEFC, it was established in 2012 by the Gillard government. It's often what's called around the world as it's called a green bank. So basically, it invests in things like clean energy, and it's supposed to both make a profit, going to make money on those investments, as well as bring down emissions. So its remit is to do both those things: invest by making a profit and bring down emissions.
Has it been a success?
Yeah, look, by any measure, it's been a huge success. In the last financial year, it made $184.4 million, whilst also bringing down emissions. Over its lifetime, it's made $2.5 billion, which is then recycled back into the sector, invested in more clean energy. In addition to making money, though, it's supposed to do this thing that's called crowding in. So it's meant to crowd in the private sector by investing in some technology that's not yet mature. It's meant to set the standard for the private sector, which then also invests in that thing. And it's actually achieved very well on that front. About $2.7 has been invested by the private sector for every dollar that it invests. Of course, all of that is supposed to bring down emissions as well, and it more than doubles its target generally for how many emissions it's meant to abate.
Has it also been a bit of a political football?
Yeah, look, very much so. So it was introduced, as I said, in 2012 by the Gillard government. The very next year, Tony Abbott was elected with the coalition. He had a promise, an election promise, to abolish the CEFC. He tried to do that. He introduced, the coalition introduced legislation to abolish the CEFC, but that wasn't successful. So since then, the government has shifted its approach to the CEFC, but it hasn't really stopped being a political football. So under Turnbull, particularly, it kind of changed its approach. He wasn't a big fan of the CEFC still. He said that, look, since it's making a profit, really it should be something that the private sector does. That argument was a little bit hard to buy because, of course, the whole mandate of the CEFC is to invest in things that the private sector isn't doing. If the private sector is investing in it, the CEFC is meant to kind of step away. But nevertheless, they kind of became a bit of a fan of the CEFC. In fact, Turnbull made a number of announcements, election promises actually, using money from the CEFC. And that was kind of this shift in the way that it was approached. It became used as what some people have called a slush fund. So the government would make commitments that looked like new money, but actually it was just telling the CEFC to invest its existing money in new things. And so there was, for instance, a very big investment in the Great Barrier Reef. That was actually CEFC money. The government has stopped trying to kill it. They're now, in fact, celebrating a lot of the money it spends. So the net zero emissions policy, for instance, relies very heavily on things that the CEFC is already spending money on.
So talk us through the Low Emissions Technology Commercialisation Fund, and will it allow the CEFC to invest in carbon capture and storage?
Yeah, well, so unlike some of those other types of investments I described, this new fund, it looks like, the details are still thin, but it looks like it's actually going to be new money put into the CEFC for them to invest. Whether or not it will be able to actually be used for carbon capture and storage is not entirely clear. Currently, it's actually unlawful for the CEFC to invest in carbon capture and storage. It's specifically prohibited in the legislation. So they would need to get legislation passed. And they don't have control of the Senate, so they would need both One Nation and someone else to support that change. And even if they did that, it's not totally clear they could invest. The CEFC would still actually make that investment because other rules require the CEFC to turn a profit, for the investments not to be too risky. Again, look, the government can make changes to the regulations and the law to make that possible, but it would need to do both those things: change the legislation and change the regulations, and then the CEFC could potentially invest in CCS.